I can't believe you've not seen Jojo Rabbit.
I've never even heard of it. That was genuine shock. Also, that was the gayest clutching of pearls I've ever seen you do. Welcome to In Bits, the podcast that deconstructs our digital lives. I'm Nicola.
And I'm Liam. And we're both lecturers in IEDT in psychology and cyber psychology.
Mm-hmm. We are. So Liam, it's your turn to be in bits about something this week. What are you in bits about?
This is a slightly challenging topic. Okay, so I'm in bits about cyberbullying, particularly how we view its prevalence and the impacts, the spaces that we use, some of the common kind of misconceptions. And what's really important is that I need to caveat this. So obviously this is a very sensitive subject, so please obviously skip this if you have someone close to you who's experienced either what we call traditional bullying or face-to-face bullying, cyberbullying, workplace experiences, anything like that. Please feel free to skip this episode, okay? Get someone else to listen to it for you if you would like to. What's really important is I need to caveat this entire episode.
I love the way we start out our podcast at the very start going, we're going to try and be more positive about technology. And then we literally have a content warning at the start of every episode going, this is going to be terrible. Please skip it if you can't.
But sometimes people get upset by topics.
Of course they do. No, I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying we were saying we were going to be positive and then we have these mad content warnings even on our positive episodes.
Yeah, but to be fair, this is my first one where I'm doing this.
Okay.
It's mainly you.
Also, to be fair, this is the internet. So your caveat.
My caveat, okay, so I have to caveat this entire conversation and say basically, I'm not going to go into specifically why a person is going to engage in cyberbullying behaviour.
Okay, that'll be another episode.
It would be, but you need like a developmental angle where you look at bullying as a more holistic approach. I'm going to touch on it from that perspective in a little bit in terms of interventions for prevention. But for example, why someone might be engaged in any particular example of bullying behaviour is much more complex than that. So just saying that someone is anonymous and that's why they're engaged in bullying behaviour is a very flippant way to describe social issues and social interaction, whether it's offline or online. So we have to take a more kind of holistic approach, and we look at a more well-rounded approach to looking at behaviour offline and online before we go start creating judgment about someone and being engaged in bullying behaviour, and even using like labelling, because that will have a significant impact depending on who we're talking about and the age of who we're talking about.
Yeah.
So cyberbullying can be really challenging to define. And there have been different definitions as technologies and our approaches to how we view cyberbullying changes. So I'm going to run through some really, really quickly, and they have some underlying kind of connections between each other. Now, why this is important is that for the last 30 years, when we've looked at bullying behaviour or cyberbullying behaviour, lots of different researchers have used different definitions. And it may seem really silly, but this completely changes the reporting of cyberbullying, the prevalence rates, who's involved. Let's get into it. In the United States, so in Miami, Justin Patchen and Samir Hinduja, their original definition from 2009 was the willful and repeated harm through the use of computers, cell phones and other electronic devices. So we don't even really use some of that language anymore. Professor Mona O'Moore, who was the founder of the National Anti-Bullying Research and Resource Centre, she said, cyberbullying, often referred to as online bullying, is aggressive, willful behaviour that's directed to or by an individual or group against another using technological devices. Okay. There's other definitions of Peter Smith in the UK. So he said, an aggressive intentional act carried out by an individual using electronic forms of contact repeatedly and by a victim who may not be able to easily defend him or herself. And what's really important about these is concepts like repetition online. They're not straightforward. So I can take an embarrassing photograph of Nicola, post it up on my Twitter, and someone can retweet it, someone can share it. Not Twitter, but you know.
I'm like, are you even on Twitter?
No. But it's that ephemeral aspect that allows content to be shared. So that's where repetition takes place. Whereas in a traditional bullying setting in a school, we would have actually said that it's a once-off, wouldn't count as bullying behaviour, but in an ongoing basis, it would. So this is why it seems really silly, but it is really important.
I feel like some of the definitions cover a lot of things like harassment and trolling and abuse and that kind of stuff as well. Like they're not specific. It's quite I suppose, fuzzy between different kinds of very toxic negative behavior.
They do, but sometimes cyberbullying behavior will touch across a number of these as well. So
Yeah.
like flaming and trolling behavior sometimes come under cyberbullying,
Yeah.
depending on the context, and that's why it's so nuanced. So there's a really old definition that I want to give you, and it's from the Department of Children and Schools and Families in the UK. Okay, and it's from 2007. It is super old. However, I think it's still really important. Okay, so this kind of the context of how cyberbullying takes place. So they describe it as an invasion into the home and personal space, the difficulty in controlling electronically circulated messages, the size of the audience, perceived anonymity, and even the profile of the person doing the bullying and their target. So it's quite good because it looks at the differences in nuance in relationship, the different spaces that it could potentially be in. And I don't know whether they intentionally expected it to be so applicable, because in 2007 you were only just writing on someone's wall on Facebook, and
You're on Bebo.
On Bebo, but the anonymity factors, like technology changed so much, but this definition is still really, really relevant.
It really is. Yeah, it's very good.
So essentially, cyberbullying is where we use any digital technology to harass, threaten, embarrass, target someone else through intentional, aggressive and harmful behaviour. Other definitions have also focused on things like the social norms of the platform, communities online and offline, how this behaviour can sometimes be normalised. And we're going to touch on some of those elements later on. But the most important aspects of these definitions is the medium that we're using. So the type of platform, the social media, the messaging app, the gaming platform, any other digital communication tool, our intention to cause harm. And I think sometimes this intention to cause harm can be quite nuanced, or may not be necessarily picked up upon. So when we talk about flaming, the theoretical frameworks for flames and how sometimes someone might completely not know that they're being flamed, and someone might be nuanced between, say, you and I knowing the kind of specific details. So that is really helpful.
So like someone kind of joking with somebody else and slagging them in a very Irish way, where they're being what looks like mean to them from the outside, but actually it's an in-joke between friends, that kind of thing
Or
can be
something
misinterpreted.
you think is really harmless from an outside perspective is actually really, really upsetting someone else.
Yes.
Repetition, and I think repetition is still important in some of these definitions. So this persistency in behaviour, whether it's a series of single incidents or one single severe incident. So one non-consensual image being shared, for example, or secondary sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think power imbalances are still really relevant. So we talk about power imbalances in traditional bullying or workplace bullying environments. So unlike offline bullying, where it's more like physical power or social power or institutional power, in cyberbullying behaviour, this could sometimes be seen as things like anonymity. Technological skill is still just as relevant, and social influence.
Yeah, so like maybe the amount of followers you have, the access you have to an audience and so on. Yeah.
We see as part of all of this, so we've gone through our boring definition, and I swear it's really relevant, but prevalence is then coming directly out of this. So we see a lot of stories being reported about increases in cyberbullying behaviour. And if you're a parent, if you're an aunt, an uncle, you're a peer, you're an adolescent, you're seeing and experiencing headlines where they're saying this, and you see a headline that says cyberbullying behaviour has doubled in Northern Ireland in 1 year, which was reported by the BBC. In 2018, the ISPCC in the UK said there was an 88% rise in 1 year in the UK. And the New York Times stated that 17,000 girls had experienced cyberbullying behaviour in 2023 alone. So if you're a parent in any of those scenarios, your instant response is, oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay. And this visceral reaction to that. And to be honest, panic and worry and concern, all completely natural feelings. If you're reading those and you're going, oh my God, and you're not actually looking at this. So when you hear these numbers, what do you think?
So if I was a normal person, I'd be horrified, but I am not a normal person. I'm someone who collects really terrible headlines about cyber psychology. So I'm reading them going, there's probably more going on here.
Yeah, and these are from reputable sources.
Of course they are. Of course they are.
But
for me, it reminds me of the way that, like, mental health issues for teenagers is reported. You can get, such a range of responses and these massive increases when suddenly doctors are mandated to report a particular thing. So there's a lot of factors at play in it. And the fact that you've just gone through a whole bunch of definitions that are all quite different from each other tells me that it depends which definition you use. Gets you which numbers.
Now, there's also one other factor that we have yet to speak about, but need to, which is screen time. Okay. And screen time being involved here. So younger people being online more and potentially experiencing more cyberbullying behaviour.
Just as a percentage of the amount of time they're spending online, basically. If you're spending 20 hours, you're more likely to have an hour of cyberbullying than if you're spending 20 minutes.
Yeah. And I have actual research to back this up, okay?
And not just me making numbers.
No, not you just making numbers. So ignore Nicola's numbers until we give them to you. So with obviously the proliferation of digital devices, social media platforms, this has altered social dynamics of adolescence. So increased screen time is a factor that is increasing or escalating cyberbullying incidences. I don't think that's an unfair statement to make, okay?
Well, it's like kids being around other kids is also going to increase the amount of bullying incidences, right? The more kids they encounter, the more likely they are to be bullied. So the more time they spend online, the more likely they are to be cyberbullied.
Absolutely. Now, there's studies, and I have some studies from Ireland and the UK, and I'm going to consistently use some of these rather than saying this sample size changed and blah, 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 blah. Let's make research more manageable. So recent studies here in Ireland, the UK, I have a couple of kind of global studies, and they point to a dose-response relationship. Now, do you know what a dose-response relationship is?
I do, but you're going to need to explain it to the audience. Don't make me explain it.
Okay. So a dose-response relationship is one where we see increasing levels of exposure and how they are associated or related with either an increase or a decrease in a risk outcome. So demonstration of a dose-response relationship, really importantly, is considered strong evidence for a causal relationship between exposure and the outcome. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's solely due to that dose-response relationship. So a dose-response relationship which can be seen between time spent online and exposure to cyberbullying, we saw this during one particular time period, which was COVID. And increased cyberbullying behaviour did happen. So Chi and colleagues found that adolescents spending 3 or less hours online faced a 54.2% risk of cyberbullying victimisation compared to 30% for those that spent less than 1 hour online.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So there's quite a jump between 1 hour or less than 1 hour and less than 3 hours. Okay. But that I think is one of the most or more staggering stats that's there. This was also found in the USA by Wiguna and colleagues in 2021, and they found that 40% of high school students with elevated screen time, so again, found a study that was similar in hours, less than 3 hours a day, reported increased cyberbullying experiences with stress mediating this response. So there was a relationship between cyberbullying behaviour, screen time, stress, and suicidal ideation as well. Okay. So consistent and actually providing that support. Now, here in Ireland, the UNESCO Anti-Bullying Research and Resource Centre based in DCU, they did a piece of research around the COVID-19 pandemic, and they had these same trends. So as lockdowns increased for average adolescent screen time, we saw it increase by about 71 to 72%, depending on the age cohorts. And this correlated to a 25% increase in self-reported cyberbullying incidents. So increases in screen time, they also found that more than half of parents, or 57%, were concerned that the pandemic would have a negative impact on their child's education, falling behind in their academic attainment, and 42% were worried about cyberbullying behaviour, absolutely warranted, and 62% were fearful for their child's mental health or well-being overall.
Yeah,
okay,
that's understandable.
So what are the actual rates of cyberbullying?
Who knows?
Okay.
Does anybody know? Do any researchers actually know?
It varies, again, depending on the definitions you look at. And depending on which study you're actually reading, it ranges anywhere from like 8%.
I've seen like 40, 50, 60% for some.
There was a recent study I saw where they were saying it was up at 48%.
Yeah.
So that's like half of every classroom.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, it comes down to what is the content that they're seeing and how are we measuring it?
Yeah. And what questions are being asked specifically. Yeah.
In Ireland, there is a more complex prevalence here. So our rates vary depending on the methodology, the age groups we examine. So I'm going to stick with the WHO study. Okay. So they said they looked at cyberbullying amongst adolescents from 2018 to 2022. And they had quite what I think are balanced numbers. Their data indicates that boys engaging in cyberbullying others increased from 11 to 14%, while girls increased from 7 to 9% during that same period. So this is during COVID. And this represents a significant shift in digital behaviour, okay, across the country. And within this same period, while these increased slightly during COVID, I think this gives a slightly more realistic response. But I would be hesitant to just discount the higher numbers and the higher rates as well. I think we need a more like nuanced story, and it's not just about numbers. It's about qualitative work in this as well. So interviews and focus groups.
Yeah, like what are they interpreting? What are the kids themselves interpreting as the negative behaviours?
But there was a piece of research that Debbie Ging did a number of years ago, and it went into a all-female secondary school, and they were looking at cyberbullying and the language that was used, and the language that was used by adults would be defined as cyberbullying behaviour, and they said that it wasn't at all.
Yes.
Okay. And that study is always going to stick with me because it really highlights the differences between an adult's perception and a younger person's
and the
perception.
language that we use to describe things. Because I remember hearing like that or reading something about cyberbullying where kids don't describe it as that, but they describe it as drama instead. So there's a lot of, and I'm sure that's different now. If that's been published, then it's probably outdated already. But there's a huge evolution in the language and the way kids talk about stuff. And unless you're including them in the research, then you won't know that, right?
Now, there was another study done here in Ireland as well. And this, again, was conducted by CyberSafe Kids. They looked at 5,000 children that range between 8 and 16 in a single academic kind of period, so September to June, and they found that 25% of primary school children and 40% of secondary school children experienced cyberbullying behaviour. So in this same time period, these results are significantly higher. Now, it comes down to the methodologies and the language that's used, and then whether this is primary, so I've seen it firsthand, or secondary experiences, and whether we're looking for repetition or not. All of this is really important.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if I was a parent reading one study and another study, I would be quite concerned and going, which one is actually correct here? Okay.
You're probably going to get into this, but there's also how kids react to it, because like most kids are fine. Most kids are actually kind of okay and they brush it off. And then there's some kids that it affects more seriously. So it's not that 40% of kids are having their mental health destroyed by it necessarily either.
But they're witnessing something like griefing in a game and they're defining it as cyberbullying behaviour.
Yeah.
This is like, we're going to touch on tactics now in a minute, okay? So the UK is always a good comparator for like our Irish samples or weird-based samples. And in the United Kingdom, they had significant variation across England, Wales and Scotland. Okay, so in that same WHO study, Wales reported 17% of young people experienced cyberbullying. In England, it was 19%. In Scotland, it was 18%. So while not dramatically different, still different rates, similar culture, and it's about reporting. 11% had also in that study reported that they had victimized someone else. So like we're seeing substantial proportions of the population in the same age cohort as the other study I mentioned, which was up at the kind of 40% range. But their study, the highest they get to is 19. Okay.
Were they asking the same questions of all the students?
Same questions. But this same study that was conducted in Ireland was only finding a 14% rise when it was broken down by gender. Okay. So Ofcom conducted research. And in that, they looked at general experience of bullying behaviour online and offline. So of that 39%, 84% of those victims were in a digital space. Okay. 61% was in face-to-face. Now, how is that possible? Because cases overlap.
Of course, yeah.
So in 2012, Professor Mona Moore did a study here. It was a big national study, and she found that 67% of cases overlap together. Okay, so when we discuss cyberbullying behaviour, even a limitation of this episode is that we're not discussing traditional bullying behaviour. So I'm very aware of this, okay?
Yeah.
Because obviously this is my area of research. So you need to be careful about how you just discuss it as one space being separated from another.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it makes sense. Like, why would a kid bully you in school but then ignore you online?
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
No, but it's also quite silly to expect that if you experience a negative experience online or offline, that you suddenly just like left in that space and you're going to be all perfect and fine. Okay. And I'm quite cynical when I discuss that. I'm like, how could you possibly think that a experience you have in a Snapchat group the night before you go back into school isn't going to impact you in a classroom? It's like having a phone call with someone.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is very reliant on how we report bullying behavior online and offline. So platforms typically for cyberbullying are the kind of more traditional formats. So like text messages, WhatsApp, they're more than half of cases, generally through social media platforms, and then a third of those through gaming-based experiences. Ilfand and colleagues did a study, and this looked at the prevalence. So this was in the Biomedical Central Journal for Public Health, and they were looking at reporting of prevalence rates and if these were reflected accurately and had an impact in psychological patient services. So really love this study. So they control for stories of childhood maltreatment, offline peer victimization, and they had, and I will say it's a little bit of a small sample for us to take a huge amount of credence from. So it's 827 participants.
It's still tiny, yeah.
Yeah, but for us to draw upon...
Yeah, if we're thinking if up to 40% of the child population is experiencing, you want these numbers to be big, yeah.
Especially if we're going to be making policy changes or anything of them.
Yeah.
They had a 10-year cross-sectional design study, which is basically they had a series of participants. So their sample actually ranged from participants who were born in 1980 to participants who were born up to 2002. Okay. So prevalence rates for adolescent cohorts. If I was born between 1980 and 1987, I had a 1 to 3% cyberbullying experience rate. And
it's actually kind of amazing that it's that high.
Yeah.
I'm like, where were they?
That's simply because someone has taken a remote control when they were playing Pong. Now, 8.3% of participants experienced cyberbullying if they were born between 1980 and 2002. I would have expected that to be a little bit higher. That's like Mona's 2012 study where it was about 8.9.
Yeah.
And then if you were born after 2000, the numbers go up dramatically, 24% experiencing cyberbullying behaviour. And that is because technology is growing and is far more prevalent. And by the time these people who are born in the year 2000, they're in primary school and they're in secondary school, technology is all around.
Yeah, it's ubiquitous at that point.
It's ubiquitous. So there's nothing surprising in these prevalence rates. Now, when we look at the impact across these age cohorts and in it predicting psychological distress, again, when it was controlled for, they argued that while the impact was small, so there was a 1% variance. Okay, this is tiny.
That's very small.
It's very, very small. But they were arguing that you were still seeing this variance after controlling for negative childhood experiences and ACE events. There was still psychological trauma that was connected to the prevalence and experiences of cyberbullying. So it is small.
1% is significant, but is that practically significant? Like, can you see that in a person?
So what I like about this is the authors say that while it contributes to psychological distress, it's a very small impact. And they argue that while it's important for us to focus on it and have a understanding of cyberbullying behaviour and victimization and how that has an impact, it's not going to be a significant compounding factor in managing psychological trauma. However, if someone is experiencing suicidal ideation and self-harming behaviour that's connected to their cyberbullying experiences, this is why they're also going to be in outpatient services.
Yeah. And I imagine within that 1%, there's variance. There's some people who really aren't having any negative experience at all. They're fine. And there are people who are having very, very negative experiences.
And it's the stats for this paper are good. And that's why I've drawn it out. Now, the 1% is very small, and I like the fact that the authors are like, you can't reinvent the wheel on the basis of that result. Now, that's age in terms of cyberbullying behaviour. Now let's talk about gender. Males or females? Who is potentially targeted more in an online space?
Part of me wants to say guys, because if we're talking about like young people, part of me wants to say that because there's a lot of machismo and kind of one-upping each other sometimes. But then girls can be really insidiously awful to each other as well. So I'm not sure. I don't know if is there a huge difference between the two? Because I don't know this research as well as you at all.
And what is also important again is be really cynical with this.
Yeah, as always, always.
So be cynical in terms of looking, well, who is more likely to report behaviour? Is it a male or a female?
Yeah.
Who is more likely to engage in an overt behaviour?
Yes.
Is it a male or a female?
Yeah, definitely guys.
Yeah. So the research overwhelmingly supports that females are frequently experience more cyberbullying than males.
Okay.
And
But we don't know. The guys just aren't telling us about it.
yeah, but the data is overwhelmingly higher for female representation as well.
Oh,
The sample
right.
size is smaller
Okay.
for males too. So females report more. Females are still
They're
experiencing
studying
more.
more. Yeah.
They're studied more. There's other areas to this.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Happy with that so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, perpetration patterns and dynamics. Boys or girls?
Both. Definitely both. Just in different ways, I think.
So boys traditionally show higher rates of engaging in cyberbullying behaviours, but this gap has narrowed. Okay. So the same WHO study, so it's a European study, they did a gender breakdown and they showed that overall boys accounted for about 14%, while females accounted for 9%. And I think this is down to nuance. Okay. Like, how are we
Defining
but
is
also
the behaviors.
are we spotting it?
Yeah. I think girls do it more quietly sometimes.
And we'll look at social forms. And what we view is, when I was talking to a parent recently about this, they were like, oh, we always have this assumption that females engage in more kind of like sophisticated forms of cyberbullying behaviour and bullying behaviour. And the research would tend to actually support that conception.
Because I'm thinking things more like exclusion rather than overtly saying something.
Yeah.
So it's much more subtle.
So again, 14% of boys victimising someone, 9% of females victimising someone.
And doesn't the research show that being a bully is as bad for you as being victimized? That it actually has a negative effect on you as well?
It does. And I'm going to challenge your language, right? Okay. And if we start to use labels, engaging in bullying behaviour is much better.
Yeah.
Or being associated with bullying behaviour, or being a target of bullying behaviour.
That makes sense to me.
Now, again, 14% for males and 9% for females in victimising someone. However, when we look at victimization rates, the gender divide is much closer. 15% of males experiencing it, but 16% of females experiencing it.
Interesting.
So female rates are higher. Females admitting to perpetration is much lower.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
That,
So I'm
it's
trying
less
to play
socially
into
acceptable for girls to be engaging in this kind of behavior. They're not
Yeah.
going to admit to it.
and it's
Because it is all self-report, isn't it?
It is. And this is consistently supported. The UK study that was conducted and by Ofcom. Okay. So I'm trying to draw similar samples, similar age
Yeah,
groups,
yeah.
so we have a consistent story. So Ofcom supports that girls are more likely to experience relational aggression online. So this is social exclusion, rumour spreading, harassment, things that are related to appearance, social relationships. Boys, by comparison, tend to experience more direct forms of cyberbullying. So threats, aggressive gaming interactions, harassment, things that were related to perceived, like exactly, you hit the nail on the head, perceived masculinity, and then performance in like competitive online gaming environments even as well.
Yeah. I suppose masculinity and femininity are so highly policed when people are young that's kind of inevitable at that point.
It is. And I think it's really interesting because we see similar trends for traditional bullying. So from a social perspective, girls also engage in social exclusion, impersonation, damage to reputation and social status. They know how to do this. And it comes back to empathy. So females are much higher in cognitive empathy. So thinking about how someone feels and how to upset them.
Yeah,
So
knowing
that's
exactly
like-
what buttons to push.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
bringing me all the way back to my childhood.
I'm triggering.
yeah, I know, fully triggered here.
Whereas males are not as high in cognitive empathy. And we want someone to be higher in affective empathy or profound empathy to counter this behaviour.
Yeah, to
So-
understand how somebody's feeling and be able to put yourself in their shoes
Yeah.
and not want to do that to them.
But cognitive empathy is basically, it's like a honing system in, like, you're playing a first person shooter and it's like having auto aim on. And it really does allow them to hone in. So conversely, males behave more directly. So in traditional bullying or offline bullying, they engage in physical or verbal forms, generally ahead of social forms. Now in a secondary school or in a primary school playground, if you take that traditional like image in your head,
Yeah.
you're going to notice someone shouting or having a physical fight much quicker than you are someone throwing like a nasty glance at someone else, or
excluding them from a
excluding
group or
them,
something, yeah.
or making them feel intimidated or threatened, because it's not as overt and
Yeah.
prevalence rates will
Or
be
making
lower.
snide comments about their clothes instead of overtly saying that they look terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. There are other research studies that have looked at how this escalates with age. Okay, and this is age generally. So from the peak is around 15, 16. this is where social media use also intensifies. So they found about 23% from the age of 15 versus like 12% at the age of 11.
Okay.
Okay. And that you do see this developmentally as a different stage. So whether it's prefrontal cortex developing or Piaget's work that we've spoken about before in terms of like rules and normative behavior, also development of ethics. And I'm going to touch on ethics in a little bit.
And also access to tech and the amount they're using it as well. Like you were saying earlier, the more time you're spending on it, the more likely you are to be experiencing this.
It is. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. How many forms, we call them forms, or tactics, how many examples of different types of cyberbullying behavior can you think of? And I'm going to count these while you give me them.
Okay, so really overt ones like, being aggressive towards somebody, calling them names, challenging their sexuality, gender identity, how they look, fat shaming. I suppose homophobia and transphobia are part of what I just said about challenging gender and sexual identity. God. Then things like excluding people from groups and activities, talking about people behind their back, spreading rumors about them, trying to ruin their reputation. There's more.
You're at about 15.
Yeah,
You've overlapped a few.
Yeah.
So in traditional, I keep calling it traditional, like offline bullying, okay? Even the word traditional is very outdated, okay?
It's like back in the old days when we used to just beat the crap out of people.
Yeah, oh my God. So we discuss 5 main forms of bullying behaviour. So verbal, physical, exclusion or social, extortion and gesture-based, okay? So 5 tactics, generally. When you look across the literature, they vary from 5 to 7 depending on which study you're looking at. While we categorize, or one of the first categorizations of cyberbullying tactics in the formats has 37 of these.
Oh wow.
Okay, and the 37 are really helpful, and I've seen quite a few of these. Like in when I was doing my PhD research, I used to be in at least one primary or secondary school every single week. Yeah, working either for prevention or intervention.
Yeah, it must be validating for people to know that they're not imagining things, like when something's happening, that actually is a form of bullying. Perhaps.
Yeah, but these are really helpful, not necessarily for the person obviously who's experiencing it, but for like, imagine you're a teacher now, okay?
And you're trying to figure out what's going on, the dynamics.
I'm going to talk through these. And imagine you're a teacher hearing some of these and knowing how to categorize them, how to go to mum or dad and say, your child has been engaged in this, or this is happening in our space and we don't know who's doing it, but this is what it looks like. Yeah. And giving information and knowledge is power. It absolutely is. So these are really helpful for things like targeted interventions, supports, identification of harmful behavior. And I'm going to touch on some really common ones I've seen. So obviously exclusion is one we see all the time. Indirectly sending someone a hurtful message. So this might be in like a WhatsApp group, okay, or a Snapchat group or a Signal group. It doesn't necessarily always just have to happen offline or online as overtly, but it could be more indirect. So I could passively pass a comment in a group, or I can overtly create a group chat and leave you out of it, even though we're in the same group, or click on offline. Yeah. Okay. And then you suddenly are aware of that. That's still exclusion. Okay. If there is no particular reason why that person has been left out of that group, like this common example of like not everyone's invited to the birthday party. Yeah. Cool. That's not always feasible. No one has the cash to invite an entire group of people somewhere all the time. But if you're in the same group of 5 people and you have a WhatsApp group already with those 5 people and there's a subgroup to that group that talks about the other group, that's not okay. Flaming. You talk about flaming all the time.
I don't use the term flaming so much because I don't think colloquially that it's very well known anymore. I think it was once.
But it's still a really relevant term.
Oh, it is, yeah. I think definitely we use it academically a lot. I just don't hear people saying that about what they would see online.
I have used the theoretical framework for flaming to help teachers identify different nuanced flames. Yeah. It is really, really helpful.
So you might want to give a definition for what flaming is, because you love your old definition.
So passionate online arguments, typically someone is swearing at someone else, asserting power over that person, sometimes in a public space. Now, social media algorithms, I wanted to point out, are really helpful here. Not for good.
I was going to say, what? For once? No.
They prioritize engagement they prioritize us to engage in kind of flaming-based content. They increase exposure of inflammatory posts where someone is calling someone else out or calling a product or a service or whatever it might be out. And Ofcom found that supported this, that 76% of Irish adolescents 8 to 12, or Irish kids 8 to 12, were using YouTube, and 37% were on TikTok. So where we're typically seeing that behaviour happen, so they're more likely potentially to see flaming behaviour in practice. So where there's like public comment sections and viral challenges for people to facilitate and be involved in that harassment. Now, exposure is another tactic. So this is a public display. Posting, forwarding communication, images or video from one person to another, or one person to many people, or many people to many people. Okay, so because of the medium, it's quite nuanced. This is where we typically will see like the non-consensual sharing of images, or where someone potentially pretends to be someone else and involves impersonation and exposure. This is really upsetting and hurtful, and we'll touch on a case that relates to this later on. Intimidation is another format. So this is sending someone a threatening message by cyber tech means or through technology. Gaming environments where you have like anonymous chat on, like straight away, it's not a good idea. Real-time experiences through voice chat, or like exclusionary tactics. So directly leaving someone else out of that voice chat, and all the direction and coordination of your group of friends for the mission you're on is all happening via voice chat, and no one's in the text chat.
Right.
Okay. And that other person is just going to continue to die.
There's so many subtle ways to
it is
bully
really
people, isn't there?
nuanced.
Yeah.
Denigration, so that's actually spreading rumours, hurting, belittling someone's reputation. Impersonation, we've seen so many impersonation cases, so damaging your peers' reputation with young kids. If I'm working with them and I talk about like, well, do you verify your friend adding you on Snapchat or on their gamer user tags? How do you know it's actually them? Like, it's very easy to impersonate someone else online.
Yeah.
So I've had cases where I've had people impersonate someone else to bring them down a peg, and that is the language that has been used.
Yeah.
And because they didn't see any harm in it, sure, everyone knows there's all of these different kind of rationalizations for why this might happen.
Yeah.
Cyber harassment, so negative, hurtful, pervasive, severe, persistent messaging. This is, again, can be facilitated through kind of three main apps. So WhatsApp, Signal and Telegram. So we have anonymity, end-to-end encryption, and it's really difficult to catch and verify in those spaces. So things like the liability of who's done it is going to be very hard to prove, and especially when it comes to some form of legal recourse. So we have legislation that focuses on this, but if you're using an app like this, it's even more difficult to do anything about it. Happy slapping. Do you know what happy slapping is?
I've heard the term before and I can't remember what it actually is.
So happy slapping is one of, in my personal opinion, one of the more stupid forms of cyberbullying. Okay, this is where you directly record yourself committing an offence.
Oh, for God's sake.
You attack someone, you record it, and then you post it online to embarrass someone. This was a huge trend with young people.
I know, I remember this.
Fight clubs fall under this as well.
Yeah.
Where they would record it and post it into their own kind of groups. This is you
literally recording your illegal
assault.
Actions, yes.
Non-fatal offences against the Person Act, 5 years in prison, like as a maximum offence of this. Diversion programme if they're adolescents. There's a lot that can be used here. It's not smart. Phishing, so tricking or manipulating information out of someone else. So I've had this in gaming spaces where someone will manipulate financial information out of the person and buy themselves a game, for example. Again, sometimes these are not very smart. And cyberstalking is viewed to be kind of one of the more severe ones. So it might involve other tactics too. Okay. Threats of harm, intimidation, and it typically is regarded as the most severe. Okay.
Yeah.
If we look at impacts, so obviously there's a number of charities and organisations that have looked at this. Spun Out, so we love Spun Out. They've highlighted a few of these concerns. Particularly, they did a piece of research and it looked at 45% of teams reporting feelings of things like helplessness, 29% reporting feeling completely alone. Now in the UK, there was a qualitative piece of work. So our first qual piece, 12 to 17-year-olds in focus groups, interviews, and then self-report surveys, and looking at the impacts that extend into adulthood. So long-term challenges, they found in their results that someone would actually find it difficult to form a trusting relationship. which I
not
think
good.
is really understandable.
Yeah.
So some students start to report to withdraw from their social groups, school academic attainment becoming challenging as well.
That's very understandable. A very reasonable reaction to an awful situation.
So, like, the fear of becoming a target actually modifies the student's behaviour. They limit their online expression, all the positive things that we've discussed previously, restricting their own access for even educational, social attainment, psychological trauma, stress, anxiety about going to school, loss of confidence, depression, social difficulties, academic attainment again, early school leaving, and further involvement in aggressive behaviour. Now, you won't be able to see this, but all of these have research studies, and these are the main outcomes that come from these.
Yeah. It actually reminds me a lot of what we talked about, the effects of trolling and harassment as well.
Yeah.
It's very,
there's
very
a huge
similar.
overlap.
Yeah.
Now, I have 3 quotes I would like you to read.
Okay.
Okay.
The first one is, it's very upsetting. It's also very embarrassing to read nasty comments written about you with no chance to defend yourself and no means of finding out who's responsible. The second one says, since it's in writing, it can be viewed again and again. The deliberate and underhand nature is intimidating, and it's hard to prevent further bullying. Social media providers are not helpful when contacted about bullying. And the final one says, picture and video bullying can be accessed by more people online and has the potential to become viral. Wondering who else is there or involved or has seen it, with no limit to how far it reaches or has reached.
And I think these 3 quotes go back to that UK Children Department of Schools and Families definition. And I always resonate with these particular 3 because they kind of highlight this sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
They fit into a number of the definitions too. Okay. So we've spoken about the problems, the prevalence, the impact. Now, what can we actually do about this? Okay. Now, the Irish are particularly good at this. Okay, we have
I'm glad to hear we're good at something.
Yeah, we've come on quite a lot. Social norms change, behavioural change, and legislative change. So Ireland was actually the first country in Europe that created national level policy for schools that they could deal with cyberbullying back in 2013.
Right.
And the language was really specific. So it allowed schools to deal with problems that happened outside of school and in other schools. Okay, so they had a legal responsibility here. When it came to the new action plan, so this was in 2022, so the primary and post-primary procedures are the action plan on bullying. So it created our Online Safety Commission. Commission Amon came out of this as well. The National Advisory Council for Online Safety, new funding, new resources. But it also updated the focuses. So generally it was just cyberbullying. Now it's also gender identity-based bullying, racial, sexism, and sexual harassment too. So as we start to see technology evolving, we're also looking at the way in which we change our approaches to dealing with bullying. And this is it more so in educational spaces. But children can create, with kind of at ease, unverified accounts, multiple platforms, and this allows harassment to continue. So we have a more well-rounded approach in understanding that this is still going to be a technological cat and mouse game that requires us to continuously adapt. So even Commission Amon is looking at how that can be done.
Yeah.
So we also have legislation here which we know as Coco's Law. So before we speak about it, Nicola, I'm going to ask you to talk to us about who Coco was.
So Coco's Law is named after Nicole Fox, whose name is very similar to my original name before I get married, Nicola Fox. But she was known as Coco, and she very tragically died by suicide after experiencing a lot of online bullying. In 2018, she took her own life at the age of 21. And she'd endured relentless online abuse and physical bullying for about 3 years before that. At the time, we did not have any legislation in Ireland to hold the people who had abused her accountable. But after her suicide, her mother, Jackie, has led a national campaign to bring awareness to this, to highlight the issues of ongoing harassment and abuse, and eventually managed to get Coco's Law enacted in 2021, which is really just incredible campaigning from her. There's a really powerful documentary on RTE called Jackie and Coco, which we will link in the show notes so you can hear more about their story as well there. So
we were also the first country in the world to introduce this legislation or any legislation like this. So the Harmful Communications Related Offences Act. So it focuses on the non-consensual image sharing abuse, which we've spoken about, threats to share images. So even threatening to do that to someone, which causes so much in terms of trauma, that can lead to the creation of trauma. The offensive liability, so building on similar legislation we've had in the past, but also harmful communications. So this actually also covers cyberbullying behaviour too. So Coco's law is helping to protect people from online abuse, image sharing, with or without consent, providing legal recourse for victims so they can actually do something about it. So it's actually providing a legislative framework. Now, this will need to be updated, okay?
As always with technology,
Yeah. So that's the legislative side of things. Now, we spoke about a holistic approach to dealing with bullying behaviour. So we need to break it down from a holistic perspective. So prevention is better than intervention.
Always.
So from a social and cultural perspective, there's a few different discussion points I have. So we've spoken about moral disengagement in the past. So rationalising or disassociating our negative behaviour from someone else, which we see in cyberbullying. Utilising and shifting power dynamics, so technological skills training, a positive school culture and climate, so being able to report content to a teacher, but also knowing that it's not socially acceptable. And these shift power dynamics. So there's a theoretical framework that looks at how we shift power dynamics, and within this, things like protective powers, like bystander behaviour, changing social norms, these are really helpful. Cooperative powers, things like policy development, legislative development, and mutual support in the educational space. And these will help to erode things like collusive power. So the negative bystander behaviour, sharing and forwarding images, and oppressive power. So this is the actual behaviour itself. Things like kind of classroom disruption, which sometimes get associated with that too. So we also can look at this from a leadership perspective. So our policies are now mandating policies be in place. They should be openly accessible, and there should be continuous behaviours. But what I love is there's also an area which is called cyberphrenesis. So cyberphrenesis looks at how we make decisions, the behaviour that is impacted as a result of the decisions and actions we take, and also who we are as an individual afterwards.
Okay, interesting.
So this also engages things like our empathy, moral engagement, challenging our disassociation. It helps to foster a positive school climate. And it also looks at things like positive bystander behaviour, promoting social relationships, and increasing those two types of power I spoke about. So protective and cooperative power. Okay. And there is a wealth of literature in this space that supports that too.
That's so good to hear.
What I want to do is take that lovely positive note of these are all the things that we can do. So online harassment, as I've said, is a much more complex problem than we expect it to be. And I've really barely scraped the surface of this. It's not easy to say why someone may have harmed someone or create a simple solution to a problem. And that's why this is not a simple episode. Okay. So we did focus on the relationship between screen time and how it's not just everything in terms of cyberbullying behaviour. It, however, can potentially support a cycle or cyclical behaviour here, which pushes teens to either potentially further retreat from the internet or not use it at all, or use it less and not get the positive benefits from it. So we actually need a mixture of solutions here. So both with online regulation and platform development, stronger mental health supports, smarter education around digital safety, and some of those areas we spoke about. So kind of moral development, ethical behaviour, and that lovely cyberphrenesis aspect. So I want to highlight some support services. These will be in our show notes. So the National Anti-Bullying website, Childline, the Samaritans, Spawn Out, Reach Out, and there are counsellor support. So all of these will also be in our show notes. But if you feel like you want to learn more information, there's a huge area of research that you can go and take a look at.
So thank you, Liam. That was really interesting and also triggered a whole bunch of childhood memories that were fun. So you have been listening to In Bits, the podcast that deconstructs our digital lives. I am Nicola Fox-Hamilton.
And I am Liam Challoner.
And you can find us every second Tuesday, wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find us on social media on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at In Bits Podcast. And we would love to hear from you. We'd love you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or a comment on Spotify. We'd love to get your feedback on what we're doing well, what you'd like to see more of, what we're not doing so great even. Like we really want to learn from what we're doing here. So please do get in touch. And we'd also love your feedback on what you're learning from the podcast and how it's helped you and what you'd like to hear from in future. This episode was produced and edited by Owen Hurley. Thank you also to Owen for our lovely intro music. And thank you all for listening. We will see you next time.
I'll see you next time. Thank you.